Hello, I'm Joshua of Milestone Play, and I am a professional game master. Today we're going to talk about telling a smaller, more compact story in our role-playing games. Most game masters are familiar with the concept of the growing one-shot. You gathered your friends together, you got a story you want to tell, it's going to be great, let's hang out Saturday, Sunday, whenever, and we're going to play a one-shot. We're going to finish this story in one session. And then you're halfway through by the end of the time that you scheduled. You're a quarter of the way through. You need to come back next week to play again. You have trouble scheduling. This video is about telling a more compact, dense story that does not sprawl. Whether it's trying to keep a one-shot, or just helping keep the narrative more compact so your players can remember what's really going on from session to session. That's what this video is about. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be a weak story or a story where nothing happens. We're going to be putting a video out next week about how to tell a big story, even if it doesn't take that much longer. But for today, we're going to talk about how to have a compact story and how to plan your session so you know you can get to the end of it. The first tip I have for you is to have more impactful characters. Having a huge gallery of NPCs for your players to interact with can be great, but if you're trying to get to the end of a narrative, having them argue about who they were supposed to go see can take time that doesn't need to be there. If you can group the different purposes and roles you want your NPCs to have into a few specific NPCs for any particular area, that can help speed things along. Having an NPC that the player characters already know, whether it's from a previous adventure or one of their backstories, having them related to the current plot in some way, even if it's just, hey, I know a guy. Those things can help speed the play along, increase buy-in, and keep things rolling a little bit faster. It also increases the depth of that character, making that character feel more impactful to the narrative. And when choices have to be made, those choices will have more significance. Unless you're telling a story about a bunch of different merchants, you really only need one merchant that can act as a hub location for the player characters to get anything they really need at that moment in time. The mayor or the village elder that the players have to report to probably has another job. The butcher is probably the barber and the surgeon if the village is small enough. People having multiple roles in the community is a common thing, especially if you're taking medieval influence. So we've reduced the number of NPCs that the player characters can interact with and therefore get confused about where they're supposed to be, who they're supposed to go to. These NPCs are probably the ones that gave the heroes the adventure, so let's talk about the adventure now. If you're doing a dungeon, the 5-room dungeon design is a wonderful model to give your players enough things to do while allow them to still get to the end. Matt Colville's video on the 5-room dungeon design is wonderful. You should go watch it. If you're not doing a dungeon, or even if you are, you can still use the second design, which is going to be a 3-beat structure. With a 3-beat structure, you have the inciting incident that your player characters are going to deal with. You're going to have the complication along the way, and then you're going to have the climax of the story. Now, let's take raiding goblins as an example. You might have goblins attacking the village as the first beat and kind of the plot hook of the adventure. After that first beat, leave yourself a little bit of narrative room. You don't have to have everything planned. Your second beat is going to grow the story and reveal it to the players. So, we had this goblin attack. What's going on? If the story is going to be about going and eliminating the goblin camp, the second beat could be in the forest or a valley gorge along the way, trying to get to their end goal. However, if the goblin raiders are a new thing and the goblins have only recently started, maybe the second beat is investigating why the goblins have started to attack. It might be going to the goblin village as a negotiation, or it might be going and exploring the wilderness and finding out that there's a manticore in the area that is harassing the goblins, maybe forcing them to give tribute, and now the goblins need tribute. Whatever is going to be the arc of this story, that is going to be beat 2. Now, the third beat is going to be that climactic moment. It is the goblin fight in the village. It's going and killing the manticore. Whatever the concluding beat is going to be, that's beat 3. So we have the introductory beat, we have the complication and growth beat, and then we have the climax beat. As we are going through this 3-beat structure, you might find that, your player characters are doing a lot of role-playing, it's taking time, and within this one-shot, you just need to do those 3 things. You haven't overplanned. However, maybe your players are going through this very fast. Maybe they have gotten through the first beat, they've talked very little to the villagers, or they are very on the point utilitarian, get what they need and go. In that case, if you have a 4-hour session planned and you're 30 minutes in, 45 minutes in, and you're already done with beat 1, well, now we introduce random encounters, complications. Maybe they have to find their way through the forest to get to the goblin encampment. Maybe that there's a couple random encounters in there, fairies, things like that, that the player characters have to deal with. As you're continuing to play, you get to about the hour-and-a-half point, hour 45-minute point of the game, and then you start to introduce beat 2, and you let beat 2 flesh out. If they finish that very quick and begin moving on, then you can have another encounter. If we're telling the Manticore tribute version of this goblin story, and we're finishing beat 2 a bit early, what complication could come? Well, it could be a shadow flying overhead. It could be the Manticore, or it could be a spouse or a sibling or something like that. Or maybe there is a shaman representative of the Manticore that has been blessed with the Manticore's wings and acts as a liaison to the goblins, and maybe that liaison favors the Manticore more than the goblin tribe. This complication could then give the player character something to deal with. It might be another combat, or it could be, oh, the Manticore knows we're coming and we have to come up with a means of moving forward. It could be another barrier on the way to the Manticore's lair, whether that is having to scale the mountain, having the rope bridge that the goblins use cut because the Manticore doesn't want the heroes coming. That barrier, that additional complication, will then fill out that time that was going a bit quick. And then as you approach the final hour of the session, you still have that for beat 3. By using this 3-beat structure, we know what is supposed to happen as we progress through the time period of the session. Quite literally, the time that we have for the session builds the story. If the players are doing more stuff early in the story, we don't have to worry about not getting to the end because we know what is important to get to the end. If the player characters are doing very little at the beginning and they're quickly getting through, well, we have more material that we can space around that will make the story deeper and give more meaning to what's going on. But once again, it is not imperative. It's not like we have to cut things out of the adventure. We know what the beats are, and we know that if we're going a bit long in the session, that this is what is needed to get towards a conclusion for the adventure. Now, a 3-beat structure may not be the specific number you need. If you're only going to be playing for 2 to 3 hours, a 2-beat structure will be enough. If you plan on playing 6 to 8 hours, you might need a 4, 5, 6-beat structure. Typically, I think of an hour to an hour and a half being available for a beat of the story, and that gives enough time for, if a challenge goes long, a combat encounter, a puzzle, if one of those things ends up going long, you know that you still have plenty of time moving forward. If it goes short, there's enough time for another short barrier or complication before you need to get to the next beat of your structure. The thing that makes this beat structure really fun for me as a game master is it does not have to be linear. You can actually kind of splay out into a bit of a web where you know where you're starting with the hook, but maybe there's 2 beats you could go to. And then from those 2 beats, maybe they have a joining beat between them, or they splay off again. And it allows for this kind of tree web-like structure where you know you're starting in the village, but then instead of just having the forest to go through to get to the goblins, maybe you get to choose the forest or the swamp. And then each of those has its own private encounter that's entirely dependent on where the players go. But after that environmental situation, they're going to get to the goblins. By having areas that the players know as this is our goal, but then having a couple beats in between that are variable, it gives a bit more choice to the players. Alternatively, you could keep this very open where the goblins are attacking, and it's the player's choice of whether or not they go to the forest to go to the goblins and fight, go to the swamp, go to the goblins and fight, or they might go, oh wait, the village mayor said that the goblins' attacks are new. Well, what's going on? All of a sudden, you kind of have this small sandbox adventure where, with the beginning plot hook, the player characters can play through it how they want. You know what to prep without prepping too much, and all the while, you know that you're going to get to the end of the adventure, whether that adventure is Village Attack, Exploration Challenge, Goblin Village Attack, or if it's Village Attack, Exploration Challenge, Negotiation, Manticore, you all of a sudden have this story that just by having, 3 main beats, an offbeat, and then a far away beat, you then have this small web that your player characters can play through where you have precisely what you need prepared. You have a couple ideas of what can fill in the gaps if needed, but you're not going and creating this story that all of a sudden is going to take 2, 3, 4 adventures to get through. You know that based off of where you are in the session, where you are in the clock, that you can get your characters, you can get your players to a conclusion to this story by the end of the session. So yeah, by managing your NPCs, by managing the core beats of your story, the secondary encounters of your story that you know aren't needed, and by keeping track of what your player characters think the end of the adventure is and where you are in the clock, you can then keep things flowing smooth towards the end of this one-shot, of this arc, and make sure that the player characters get to a conclusion as opposed to having this big sprawling story that just never ends. You have the ability to do it. You just have to pay attention to the pieces, pay attention to the time, and you'll get there by the end of it. If this sounds a little bit of a bare bones husk of an adventure model, don't worry. Next week, we'll have a video about making your adventure a little bit bigger, a little bit deeper, and have a little bit more going on. So, thank you for watching, and hit that end card. Thanks for watching the video. It was made with the support of our patrons over on Patreon, where you can see behind-the-scenes content and the development of our own TTRPG systems. If you're looking to join a game, head on down to the description where we have a link to our Discord. You can join long-form campaigns, short mini-series for bite-sized narratives, or quick dips into systems you don't want a long-term commitment to, or you can join our Tower of Taziok. Tower of Taziok is a 5th edition infinite dungeon with roguelite elements, legacy play, and downtime synchronous with the real world. After you form a house of patronage, every week that passes in your life, your character gets a week of downtime. Everything else you can check out milestoneplay.com, and yeah, thanks for watching. Let's get going.